It's the most magical time of the year, and I'm not talking about Christmas. I'm talking about the NFL season. So make sure you're ready with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV. Get the most live NFL games all in one place. Right now, you can save $85 when you bundle NFL Sunday Ticket with YouTube TV. Sign up today at youtubetv.com/Spotify. Device and content restrictions apply. Discount applied to first 4 months of YouTube TV, then $72.99 a month. Ends August 29th. Terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. No refunds.
We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm good. We've got 4 of us, which is very strange. We were talking off air about how I've got some British lingo, and I'm going to start by pre-warning everyone that this isn't going to mean anything to you, but it's currently 29 degrees Celsius here. Now, I know all you in the America, that's probably not very warm. You probably don't know how hot that is. So I looked it up. It's about 84 Fahrenheit, which for London doesn't really get 84 Fahrenheit. And in England, when it gets hot, every single person buys a pool and makes lots of noise outside. So I have every window shut around me. I'm currently melting, so if at any point I either faint or you just see me repeatedly touch my forehead, it is absolutely boiling in here. And I expect no sympathy because I know it gets hot. Wherever you guys are, I don't even know where you 3 are based, but I imagine it's hot. America to me is just hot. So for England,
you just got to get ready for camp. You know, you're acclimating, ready for that.
Yeah, this is about as hot as it gets for me. So yeah, if I suddenly go very, very quiet. There you go. A little bit of English lingo. Celsius, which I know you guys don't use. You use this weird Fahrenheit thing, but we're old school. I think we still use
Jonny,
Celsius. So there you go.
If you can tell from my hat, I live in Arizona, and it's 45 Celsius today.
Yeah, but do you have aircon everywhere?
Yes.
There you go. See, we're just not prepared for it. So I have every window shut, and I kid you not, literally, as I'm getting ready to record, I look at my window, and my neighbours are filling up a pool. So it's just going to be noise. So windows are shut. There is no air coming in anywhere from where I am. But yeah, Arizona's probably a little bit hotter than London, I take it. But you do have aircon everywhere, whereas we definitely do not. So I'm going to continue to moan that it's hotter here, actually, than it is where you are.
Yeah, as you can tell by my blanket flapping on the wall here, I've got a fan blowing into my office right now because it's ridiculously hot here as well. But we didn't come here to complain about the heat. We came here to do a rookie season review with some special guests. First up, we have Nick Waters. You can give him a follow on Twitter at Philly_films and check out his YouTube channel, Philly Film Room. Does incredible video content. Really excited to get him on the show. Nick, how are you doing?
Oh, fantastic. It's Tuesday, 1 o'clock in June, and we're talking Eagles football. I can't think of a better place to be, so very excited to be here.
All right, and we're also joining his co-host on their podcast, Eric Sidewater. You can give him a follow on Twitter at Eagles X's and O's. You can check out all of his stuff too when they pod together again on the YouTube channel Philly Film Room. Eric, how are you doing?
Doing great. Candidly, I've always been a fan of your content, going back to your all 22 reviews, and so it's a little bit surreal just to be, recording live with you. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, Eric and Nick don't do a lot of live stuff. They record a lot of their stuff. So first time experience here, maybe not first time, but they're normally pre-recording and we're going live here. And we are going to do this show. We're going to go through a rookie season review for some of the key Eagles guys from last year. So obviously Jalen Carter, we're going to go a little bit deeper on Jalen Carter than anybody else. We'll hit on Kelee Ringo, Sidney Brown, Nolan Smith, Moro Ojomo. But we are going to break this up into 2 episodes for podcasting platforms. So if you're watching live right now and you go back to listen on audio later and only half of it's there, just wait till next week. Jonny and I's recording schedule's a little messed up over the summer, but we want to keep you guys stocked with some Eagles football talk. So we're going to dive in first of all and talk about, the prize of the draft last year. he was the number 1 overall guy on a lot of guys' boards. He was number 2 overall on mine, in full disclosure. I had Will Anderson ahead of Jalen Carter on my big board. But Jalen Carter falls to number 9. The Eagles trade up and select him in the draft. And he comes in and has a pretty good rookie season. I'll throw out some stats, and then we're going to kick it over to Nick and Eric and let them talk a little bit about what they saw. But Jalen Carter in 2023, I've got it here on the screen. You can go search my tweets if you are listening on an audio platform and you want to see this visually. But out of qualifying interior defensive linemen, which was a minimum 350 snaps, 95 guys qualified. And all these stats are from Sports Info Solutions. He had 534 snaps, which ranked 43rd. He ranked 56th in tackles, so lower volume there overall. But then you get into his pass rushing, which was really the bread and butter. He had 382 pass rush snaps, 6 sacks. He had a 1.7% sack rate that ranked 17th among interior linemen. He had 39 pressures with an 11% pressure rate, and that ranked 12th. And then he was lower on run defense, 152 run defense snaps. Per PFF, he ranked 5th in overall defense grade, 12th in run defense grade, and 8th in pass rush grade. And so Jalen Carter really came out of the gate hot last season, and I think people were really excited. You see those first few games and the way he was just dominating. And as the season went on, the season spiraled out of control, starting with that 49ers loss. And Jalen Carter saw his pressures per game drop from 3.7 over the first part of the season to 1.8. And I think it's worth noting he played over 400, or he never played over 400 defensive snaps at Georgia in a season. And that San Francisco game marked when he went over 400 snaps. But I do think it's too simple to just call it a rookie wall. I think there's more that went into that. I don't think we should necessarily just expect him to take a leap automatically. Nick, you did a great video during the season breaking down some of Carter's struggles down the stretch as he started to slow down. What did you see on the film over the back half of the season, and where do you see that room for improvement for him in year 2?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was circumstantial. All right, so the beginning of the season, if you go back and look at the teams that they were playing and the health of those teams at that point in time of the year, they were playing a ton of backup or rookie players all the way up through really the Cowboys game in week 9. I mean, you can go back to even the first game of the season against the Patriots. They were down their first 2 guards. So he was going against 3rd and 4th string players at that point in time. We should expect a player like Carter to kind of dominate in those scenarios, and he did. So that's great to see. Once you got towards, like I said, week 9 against the Cowboys, and then you start to come back from the bye and play the Chiefs, and then they played the Bills, playing the 49ers. Those snap counts rose, but also the players that he was going against were a lot better too. The Cowboys have 2 all-pro guards. I mean, you're just not going to keep up the same level of play against those guys. Now, he still was wrecking shop on some plays, and there was a play against the Cowboys where he got a sack against Tyler Smith off of a nice double swipe move. That's not easy to do against an all-pro caliber player. So those are things that you really like to see. They play the Chiefs, who I think have the best trio of interior players from their guard, center guard, especially now that Jason Kelce is retired. They had 2 all-pros at center and 1 at guard, and then another Pro Bowl level player at their other guard position. So listen, they just started playing better teams at that point in time. So I'm not that surprised that his numbers took a bit of a hit. But at the end of the day, once you start putting more of your tendencies on tape, you start to see other teams are able to game plan for you a little bit better. Some things that I noticed specifically with Carter's, and I started noticing this around week 4 against the Commanders, is he comes out of his stance so low, but a lot of times he has his head so far over his skis that teams are using what's called a snatch technique, where they kind of just pop their feet back and throw you to the ground. I have a clip of that I sent to you, Shane. That's a good example for people to see. But that really showed up the rest of the year, and it's just one of those tendencies where he's going to have to work on his body positioning as he goes into next year. There's also other little things, like there's times where his hands would just be very wide. He'd let people get into his chest. Some of those things show up the more you put him on tape, and we expect him to get better at that as he progresses throughout his career. But even still, he was one of the most dominant players at his position, especially as a rookie. I mean, if you just go back, I'll add some of the numbers you discussed. If we look at the top 100 rookies in snaps since 2019 among interior defensive linemen, his pass rush win rate was first. His pressure rate was third. What I like to look at is a thing called their real pressure rate. That's what I call it. If you have access to PFF Ultimate, which is really what the teams have, it's not really available for the public. They break their pressure numbers into different categories, so you can include unblocked pressures and cleanup pressures. And Shane, I sent you a graphic of Jalen Carter's stats, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about there. But if you take out all of his unblocked pressures and his cleanup pressures, his real pressure rate was first. So this brings me to the Dolphins now. Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer had their best seasons of their careers with under Fangio. They had the most unblocked pressures among any team last year, among the interior defensive line. They had Wilkins had 20 unblocked pressure, Sealer had 14 on his own. Jalen Carter had 1. So if you look at the real pressure rates of Wilkins and Sealer versus Carter, Carter was at 11.8%, Sealer was at 4.5%, and Wilkins was at 5.2%. So what is the ceiling for Carter going into next year when Vic Fangio is going to help scheme up some more open and unblocked pressures and make life easier for Jalen Carter? He got 6 sacks on his own. Wilkins went from a career high 4.5 sacks to 9 sacks just with Fangio. What is Jalen Carter going to get to when he's getting 20 unblocked pressures a season, or potentially getting to that point in time? So I'm super excited for Carter. I personally, at one point in time, he was plus 7,500 to win Defensive Player of the Year, same as Josh Sweat and Jalen Phillips, who is coming off of a torn Achilles. And I thought that was crazy. Now, I'm not saying he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but listen, I thought that was wildly mispriced. If he gets to a 10-sack range, which is where Sealer and Wilkins got last year, and the Eagles are, one of the better teams in the league, he's going to be talked about as one of the Defensive Players of the Year. So I'm super excited for him, and I don't want to take up all the time. I'd like to hear what you guys think about him as well.
Yeah, Eric, is there anything you wanted to add in on that? Just your general impressions of Jalen Carter in his rookie season and kind of what you expect from him under Fangio in year 2?
Yeah, Nick really said it all. I think that was a great recap. The only thing I'd add is I think you said he played roughly 580 snaps or something like that. Now, if you look at how Fangio likes to lean on his best defensive players, that number might shoot up into the 800s. And this is always the question, which is, does their performance scale with that increase in volume? Now, one of the things about Carter is he looked great in his rookie year. You look at the best defensive tackles around the NFL, they don't generally hit their stride to like year 3 or 4. So he's way ahead of the curve. So, maybe he loses a little bit of juice in the pass rush situations, because if you look at, you put his splits up there, he was kind of biasing his snaps towards more passing downs. But like Nick mentioned, with all of those schemed unblocked pressures, with those little stunts that they run on the inside, that could do wonders for his production. So, when I scouted him, I was like, man, this guy's like the best defensive tackle I've ever watched. The only thing I overlooked in scouting him is that he didn't play that many snaps, despite being one of the best players in all of college. So you're always going to look a little bit better when you're always fresh with the Georgia rotation. And this is why Fangio kind of was harping on, let's make sure these guys are in great conditioning. That's going to be the difference maker, throughout the season.
You guys have both mentioned the way that Fangio schemes up some of these unblocked pressures. And Nick, you sent me a clip, and I want to let you guys walk our viewers through it. And then Jonny, I'll throw it to you too. But walk me through this rep against the Titans and how you think Vic Fangio could build a pass rush plan for Jalen Carter using similar ideas and stunts here.
Yeah, so let's go to the tight view so we can see the defensive linemen here. So what's going to happen a lot, and it happened a lot last year, is teams were really trying to put 2 bodies on Carter, and the same thing was happening with the Dolphins. A lot of times, especially on third downs, they're going to try and slide their protection over to Wilkins if they can, as long as the Dolphins aren't presenting them a look where they need to slide their line to to a potential blitzer or something like that. But what the Dolphins were doing a lot were running this nose tackle pick stunt. It was essentially a read stunt. So what happens is the center is going to work with the guard towards Wilkins. And when they read that, both of those defensive tackles are reading the center. And so if the center steps towards you, essentially as a defensive tackle, you know you're going to loop around and your buddy is going to come and pretty much blindside pick the center. And it really puts a lot of stress between the opposite center and the center and the opposite guard to communicate and switch off that stunt really well. But it's just it's a difficult thing to pass off, especially if you're not expecting it. But it's going to be one of those automatic reads where if the line's sliding to Jalen Carter, well, he's getting a pick set for him to come around looping free. And the thing with these plays is you need certain types of body types or certain types of athletic profiles to run these stunts. If you ask Jordan Davis to be the guy that's looping a lot, he's not going to be as successful as Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter's movement skills for the position and his size are incredible. It's amazing. He moves like a guy that's 20 to 30 pounds lighter. You watch him and Milton Williams, and they're same type of movement styles, but he's just so much bigger and a better athlete. So you really need a certain type of player to run these stunts. Now, I like to add one more thing about this. Not only is this going to help open up, when Jalen Carter is getting double teamed, but one of the ways to really to offset the stunt is to have your center kind of get more depth in their pass drop. So when that does happen, that also makes it easier for when Jalen Carter is double teamed and they don't have this stunt called. It's easier to beat one guy if he's at one level versus your center being a little bit further back. You get to kind of work against one guy, and then you can get to the next guy and start working against him. So it kind of builds off of each other. You're kind of forcing the center to get more depth in his pass drop because of that stunt that you're constantly running, which in turn helps you when you're not running that stunt and he's getting doubled anyways. It helps make Jalen Carter's life a little bit easier. And I think this is something that we're going to see a lot of. I really think last year their best pass rusher was Hassan Reddick, and they built a lot of their exotic pressures or their stunts around Reddick. Well, now that Reddick's gone, this really opens up a path for Carter to have the pass rush built around him, and I think it's going to take his game to the next level.
All right, so interesting stuff there. Some things that you could maybe see schematically from Vic Fangio moving forward. Jonny, you and I have talked about Jalen Carter a little bit more. Now, hold on just a second. Eric, did you have something you wanted to throw in there?
Just to add real quick, I think a lot of times you're going to see those stunts on more obvious passing downs because it can screw up your run fits. And one of the things we talked about is who is the best pass rush partner on third downs with Carter. And I actually think that play you just showed there, it would be great to pair Brandon Graham with him because he does have the ability to pass rush, but also has like the pop in his hands where he can drive the center sideways and open up room for Carter. So.
All right. Let's also jump. I sent you a clip of Sealer running the stunt too, because this play not only helps Wilkins, it was mainly run for Wilkins, but it also can help free up the guy setting the pick if you don't switch it off right. So if we look at the tight view on this play, again, we're going to see the same thing. The line is going to slide, the center is going to slide and work towards Wilkins. But watch what happens on this exchange. Sealer comes free, and that's why Sealer had 14 unblocked pressures last season, is just because of this play. Now, sometimes the pick does get set for, because it's a read stunt, the pick does get set for Sealer, but more often than not, the line was sliding to Wilkins. So it was Wilkins that was the one that benefited specifically, but you can also benefit in an indirect way if you are the guy setting the pick. And I think, like you mentioned, Brandon Graham's a good guy that could do that. I think Milton Williams could also fit in well with his athletic style, his profile, to be able to run those stunts as well. And you got to be a good teammate to run the stunt. You can't be selfish doing that.
Yeah, that's one thing that we'll never have to worry about with Brandon Graham. So I would love to see Brandon Graham go out on another one of those double-digit sack years. I was so happy for him when he finally got over the hump and got the double digits a couple years ago. I doubt that's going to happen, but I'd love to see Graham, hitting the quarterback a few times over this next season. Jonny, you and I have spoken about Jalen Carter, on and off the air, but from the things Nick and Eric are talking about, what have you seen that we haven't mentioned so far? Do you agree or disagree with kind of their stuff? I guess I'll give you the floor here to talk a little bit about Carter and your thoughts on him moving forward.
Yeah, to be honest, you can't really disagree, can you, with loving Jalen Carter? I'm a little bit similar to Eric, so I didn't watch Carter that much pre-draft because I just assumed the Eagles had no chance of getting him. And then I kicked myself when they drafted him. So I went back and watched him mainly after they drafted him. And I've done this for a while, and he was the second best defensive tackle I ever scouted, the best being Aaron Donald. Like, Aaron Donald was always my favorite player in that draft class because he jumped off the screen. I think people forget, Carter weighed in about 313 or something at the combine. Like, he's a big guy. I think at his pro day, there was talks about his weight going up as well, if I remember last offseason. I'm sure he was about 320 by his pro day. Yeah, if you watch him, he wins with, like, gap-shifting quickness. Like, that's his game. Like, he jumps through gaps like a guy who weighs 290. And to be that quick at 310, 320, however big he is, like, just as an overall player, Nick mentioned this, and I don't really talk in, like, hyperbole too much, but I think he could be the best defensive player in a couple of years. Like, I do think he has that level of potential. He's the only current Eagles defensive player who has that potential. There's not really anything he can't do. Like, he can anchor against double teams. He's big enough. His hand usage is really good. He hasn't just got one pass rush that he consistently goes to. His power to finish, like his burst in run defense as well. Like, he's pretty much a complete player as a rookie. Now, obviously, he's got a lot to learn because he's a rookie playing a very difficult position, and he's going to lose a few reps here and there. But in terms of, like, overall potential, like, without sounding too, like, optimistic, it is as sky high as it can possibly be. I think for him, it's going to come down to off-the-field concerns and weight gain and conditioning, and can he handle, as Eric mentioned, the volume of stats from a pure, like, talent level. There's not really anything negative I can say. I think Nick showed a little bit more of the technical stuff of his rep where he falls forward as well, and I do wonder, stuff like that, how much that comes down to concentration, focus in the meeting rooms, focus during the week, and again, that horrible work conditioning we mentioned a lot with Jordan Davis, because he's going to play a lot next year. But I don't really have anything else to add. Like, I do genuinely think out of all the Eagles players, I'm most confident on succeeding long term. He is number one by a mile, and I've sort of been in love with him as a player ever since I scouted him pre-draft, to be honest with you.
The biggest question I still have about Jalen Carter, and it was the biggest weakness I listed for him pre-draft, the biggest concern, other than the off-the-field stuff that, I'm just not in a position to know about, so can't speak on. But the biggest thing that I was concerned about with him coming out was that I thought he was overly reliant on, like, club moves. I wrote in my scouting report, overly reliant on inside club/swim moves, needs to develop more moves and refine his hand placement. And to me, looking at him and a lot of his reps, especially down the stretch, that's still what I think the biggest thing that he needs to do is he needs to build out that pass rush plan. He needs to get his hands need some work. He gets too wide. He's a little wild with his hands sometimes. So that's the biggest thing I would like to see improvement from him on over, his first full offseason in the NFL going into year 2. I'll throw it to each of you guys quickly before we move on. What's the biggest thing, the biggest leap, the biggest improvement you hope to see from him next season? Eric, I'll throw it over to you first.
I think it's what you mentioned. Over reliance on that like club move, I think that also is hand in hand with rush lane integrity, where you're always trying to work this move and then you'll end up like moving way out of your gap, and whether you're leaving room for the quarterback to step into that vacated space or actually scramble for yardage. This was a problem for the whole defensive line last year, where, people just use the buzzword freelancing, but, the way it actually unfolds is they're just desperately trying to, like, beat their guy rather than, like, collapse the pocket, and it works against each other. So I agree with you, if he gets a little bit more diverse pass rush repertoire, then he won't be moved out of the space as often.
All right, Nick, what about you? What's your biggest hope for improvement?
Yeah, that's Eric pretty much stole what I was going to say is rush lane integrity. He would have fell into a few more sacks if he just had better rush lane integrity. 2 of his sacks, his first sack ever, good rush lane integrity, the quarterback gets pushed into him and he just falls into his sack. One of his sacks against the Rams was very similar. There's actually 2 clips I wanted to show about exactly what you guys are talking about, and it kind of goes to your point, Shane, about what you were talking with his inside club move. There's a play against the 49ers against Brock Purdy where he just he throws his inside club, but here he is as lined up as a 3 tech over here. He continues to try and work that inside club again after it's already been caught, right? At a certain point in time, you need to convert to power, just collapse the pocket. If he had done that, Reddick would have forced Purdy up into his arms. He would have fell into a sack, or at least made this a much tougher play for Purdy overall. The next play I wanted to look at is a play against the Dolphins. It was actually Nolan Smith's unblocked sack. And it was one of Vic Fangio's base plays that he likes to run. Desai ran this a few times last year as well. For people unfamiliar, Desai coached under Fangio for 4 seasons. So we again see Carter. Carter's supposed to be coming across the opposite face of the center right here, but he instead tries to club back outside for some reason, and he clubs into the path of where the blitz is coming. Now, luckily, the line slid the other way, so Nolan Smith came unblocked. But you can see if that didn't happen, he would have allowed a huge rush lane for the quarterback right there to step up into. It's little stuff like that, just being better with those little details, I think is just going to help improve his game and his numbers right there.
All right, Jonny, anything you want to add on to that? What's your biggest hope for Jordan Davis, for Jalen Carter taking that leap in year 2?
No, if I'm honest, the stuff that Nick mentioned in true podcast fashion of stealing each other, I was going to mention the rush lane integrity. But that was also not just a problem for Carter. And I sort of hinted at that when I said about it's going to be what he does in the meeting room and conditioning wise. I think that's the kind of thing I'm on about. Like, how serious does he take the game? Because body type wise, athletic profile wise, like, it's there. So yeah, I'll leave it there before we go for 3 hours on Jalen Carter. But the film is extremely promising. So if anyone wondering, in summary, I think we all agree that the potential is absolutely sky high.
All right. Yeah. Jonny, we need to get some guests on that don't watch the film so we can disagree with them every once in a while and stop stealing what each other's going to say, I guess. So
It's time for today's Lucky Land horoscope with Victoria Cash.
Life's gotten mundane, so shake up the daily routine and be adventurous with a trip to Lucky Land. You know what they say, your chance to win starts with a spin. So go to LuckyLandSlots.com to play over 100 social casino-style games for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. Get lucky today at LuckyLandSlots.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's turn the page and let's talk about another guy that the Eagles took in last year's draft. This is a pick that I was extremely excited about in Kelee Ringo. I loved Kelee Ringo. He was the number 24 player on my big board in the draft, and he fell out of day 1 entirely. He was a 4th round pick, I believe. They traded up and got him early in the 4th round, so fell out of day 2 entirely. And I was thrilled when the Eagles got him, and then I was frustrated all season long that James Bradbury and Eli Ricks continued to get reps over him. I wrote in my scouting report for him that I thought he really fit as like an outside corner in like a cover 3 type scheme, but I really thought he thrived in press coverage for the Eagles last year. And now you bring in Vic Fangio, who doesn't play a lot of press man, and in my head I'm like, are we about to Rasul Douglas this guy? And I hope not, but we'll get to a few stats for him, and then I'll throw it over to you guys. So last season, and again, it's in limited reps, Kelee Ringo did not qualify based on the minimum snap count of 300. There were 122 qualifying corners, but the ranks are where he fits had he qualified on the screen. So he played 185 snaps. He allowed a passer rating when targeted of 75.5, which is 52nd. His yards per coverage snap was 0.6, which ranked 14th. His success rate allowed was 37.5%, which ranks 25th. His broken tackle plus missed tackle percentage was 11.1, which was 34th. His average tackle depth, which isn't probably super important for a corner, but was 3.8 yards. And then if you look at his PFF grades, he was graded 65th overall in defense grade, 24th in run defense, 13th in tackling, and 70th in coverage. Now, coverage stats are really difficult. you probably shouldn't read into those too much, because it's tremendously difficult for somebody watching a play to be like, oh yeah, that's who was targeted, that's who was at fault. And PFF grading notoriously doesn't take into account what happens on plays where corners aren't targeted. So you get some skewed things there. All that to say, I thought there were times that he looked really good, particularly in press man, which is not what I was envisioning as his primary usage. Nick, what did you see from Ringo in year one? And how do you see him fitting into a loaded cornerback room this year with the Eagles investing first and second round picks into the position as well?
Yeah, so where I think he really got to work on his press coverage skills was when he was playing on the punt return team. Because if you go back and if you're a nerd like me and you go back and watch all these special teams plays as well, you can see he was like erasing guys. There's a big reason why their special teams got a lot better, especially their punt return team. He was erasing guys, and it's essentially like he was sitting there in press coverage the whole time. So he was working on this stuff all season long to begin with, and you could see that really translate and carry over once he did get on the field. I think whether or not he starts this year, I don't know, but I think in the long-term plan, if we go into the year next year where you have in your sub package where you have DeJean at nickel and then you have Mitchell and Ringo on the outside, I think that's something I could really get behind. This guy's athletic traits are off the chart. Add with it his size at the position, which is uncanny. He has all the traits to really be one of those top-end players at his position, and there's a reason why A.J. Brown was talking about him with all-pro caliber skills. I think he's best, and I think he can play off coverage and be a good player and that kind of scheme. And I think it really fits in well with what Fangio likes to do and how he likes to play his coverages. He's more of a match cover 3 or a lot of match coverages, which play out very similar to cover 1. The times when I saw him playing like true zone coverage and cover 3, there was times where a lot of times you see this with younger players. A lot of times they just get depth because they don't want to get beat, and then they allow a lot of underneath stuff. But when he was playing more of the match coverages, it's more of a man technique style, and he was a lot more patient with his footwork and his back pedal. He would trust his speed, and that's a huge thing. A lot of times these guys are just flipping and opening their hips too early and just give up stuff underneath. And when they were playing more of those match style coverages, he was a lot better. He was a lot tighter in his coverage. The play he had against DK Metcalf, that was incredible tape, great teach tape right there. Everything from his eyes to his footwork to his hand placement when he went to secure the tackle and then try to knock the ball out. It was great stuff to see. And you really want to see those flashes from younger players, because at the end of the day, a lot of these guys can make plays, but it's about building consistency, and we want to see, can they reach those heights? And I think we see a lot of plays where you see, okay, this guy could be really good if he just is more consistent with stuff. I think a big reason why we didn't see him a lot earlier in the season is like if you go back and watch the Cardinals game, there's times where Reed Blankenship's sitting there having to tell him where to go before the play. It's just tough to throw a guy on the field if it's like he's not able to figure out, am I traveling with this guy across the formation when they motion, or where's my run fit if they bring in a nub formation or they use a nub tight end, which essentially forces the corner into the run fit. Is like a lot of the little stuff of understanding where he needed to be, but that's what happens a lot with rookies and why a lot of times they don't play early despite being better athletes than some of the vets ahead of them. So I think with another year under his belt, you can really start to see his athleticism shine a lot more when he's not having to think so much about what he needs to do.
All right. Eric, what were your thoughts on Kelee Ringo, initially, with some time removed now, and how do you think he could fit into the Eagles' plan for 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, when we talked about him on the Philly Film Room podcast, I kept saying, why did he drop to the 4th round? Because you go back and he looked a lot better than that, probably like a 2nd round talent. And I assumed it was because he was terrible in run fits, because he's like, almost 6'2" and runs a 4.3. And then I watched and I was like, no, he actually is really aggressive coming up and is a sound tackler. He has like quite a bit of heft to him. I think he's pushing 210. So it's not like he's a stick figure. I think, maybe a little bit mismatch in the scheme fit. As Nick mentioned, he's probably best suited as press man. And this is one of the reasons probably AJ Brown highlighted what he thinks his potential is, because there's not a lot of guys who have the size, speed to be able to actually press him effectively. So he's like, oh man, this guy's a unicorn out there in practice. Now there is a logjam out there. Ringo to me would be starting on probably 15, 20 NFL teams, but just because they have so many other capable starters, he probably won't start. But yeah, I love his potential. I think it's back to what Nick said, just making sure that he knows his assignments, alignments, and all like the checks and stuff at the line is probably why he didn't get more playing time, because Bradbury, I mean, it was pretty obvious halfway through the season that he was cooked. So I understand, Shane, your frustration of why he didn't get on the field. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but he did show some really good reps against Mike Evans. And I had always thought of like, this is the guy who, if you are going to occasionally do matchup-based coverages, which I know that's not a big part of Fangio's scheme, but from time to time, maybe you'll see it. He could follow those alpha X receivers and take them away.
Yeah, there was, I think a lot of people just, me included, once that Buccaneers game was over, it was like, I'm not watching this film. But then when I eventually went back to watch it again, they were pretty much shadowing Mike Evans with Kelee Ringo, especially on third downs. He had some help some plays, other plays he didn't. But I think that just showed you that what the coaching staff really thought about him, and especially at that point in the year, like really throwing him out there and seeing what we have as we go into the next season. I think it showed a lot of trust in him and what he's able to do.
All right. Jonny, you and I spoke a little bit about Ringo during the season, but it's been a while, and if I'm honest, I don't even remember what you said back then. So what are your thoughts on Kelee Ringo heading into 2024?
Yeah, so I remember I said you were one of the. I thought I had him as high as anyone, and then you told him you were like 22nd on your board or something, and I realized I actually wasn't. I said I'd probably taken him at 30, so I had like a late first round, early second round grade, and I obviously got that wrong because the NFL disagreed with me big time. Like, he's just a ridiculously good athlete, sprinter speed. I think he even was a sprinter. I'm desperately trying to remember my notes from last year. But I'm sure he ran like a 100-meter sprint in something ridiculous when he was in college. Really big, really physical, and not just somebody who's raw, like can play the ball in the air, can carry routes down the sideline, like vertical speed, athleticism, it's all there. The concern I had was two things, really. I felt at times he was a little stiff. Pre-draft, I worried. Basically, my biggest concern was when he was in out-and-out man-to-man coverage and he had to follow receivers running inside, which is why actually I really like him. And Nick, you mentioned like a free match style defense where he can pass off receivers when they run inside. I don't think you really want him like running across the field with like drag and inside slants, etc. I think you sort of want him to stay outside. He's very young. So I remember that being one of the reasons I was shocked that he fell, was I'm pretty sure he was only 21 during the season as well. So I think like you guys mentioned, like the potential was really there. Like, I'm really excited. I do recall in college, I remember writing about how he was quite boom bust. Like, I think Cedric Tillman got the better of him a lot. I think sort of there were reps when I expected him to be better in press coverage and maybe he wasn't as clean as I'd hoped. And I think that's probably one reason why he didn't play as much last year as we hoped. I think the biggest thing for him would be scheme fit. Like, I think the Eagles last year drafted a number of like press corners outside. They didn't just draft them. They also signed like guys like Greedy Williams. And I guess they were going to play a slightly different scheme. And then they ended up not really pressing a great deal. And it just seemed like a little bit of a mismatch. We know the whole defense went wrong. It felt like personnel and scheme did not align by the end of the season. So we didn't really get to see him that much. I'd have liked to have seen him a little bit more. But I don't really care if he plays this year. I'm going to be honest. I like Darius Slay more than others. They've obviously drafted the first round corner, who everyone's very excited about, and I expect him to play. And even DeJean may end up on the outside in future years. So I'm not that fussed about this year. If he is sort of CB3, CB4, Eric mentioned that you can use him in certain matchup situations if you want. Players will get injured. He will get his time eventually. So I'm excited to watch him. I think he's still got a little bit to do, but you'd expect that from a fourth round pick. But I think similar to Jalen Carter, I guess, potential-wise, he's got it all. Like, you can really, really see a top-level corner there. And I think Eric's right. For a lot of teams, he would start just because of his sheer size, sort of size, strength, athleticism sort of combination. I think for him, it will come down to as I said, it will come down to scheme fit and opportunity. And it may be that it takes him a little bit of time to break through because of the cornerback room. But he's not someone that I'd give up on long term. I think he could end up. It might just take a year or two until we really sort of see his full potential.
Yeah, you mentioned the track speed. When he was a junior in high school in Arizona, he won state in both the 100 and 200 meter dash. So definitely comes from that track background. And we've talked about the scheme fit and how, he worked really well in press man coverage. And Vic Fangio doesn't run a lot of that. It's a lot of split field coverages and things. But one thing you do end up with a lot of times, especially against like 3-by-1 sets, is you can isolate a corner in one-on-one man coverage against that single receiver, and it allows you to cheat the safeties over and things, basically stealing an extra defender for the other side. And I do think that's a role that Ringo could do quite well, especially matchup dependent on who the isolated receiver is. If it's a Mike Evans, if it's a Travis Kelce type guy potentially isolated on the back, I think you could do that with Kelee Ringo some. Now, obviously, you don't know that that's what they're going to do before they break huddle, and so you've got to be comfortable with him on the field and in all facets. But I want to show one play for Ringo that I had posted on Twitter last year. He's at the bottom of the screen, and I think it's something that you could see. Fangio likes to do a lot of quarter half type coverages, and that's what the Eagles are in here with Ringo at the bottom of the screen, and he carries this route vertically. He press bail, carries it a little vertically, and then gets back to the flat and makes a tackle. And I also think that's a role that you could see Ringo in, as sort of that flat defender. And again, you got to be able to do a little bit of everything. You can't just put him out there to say, okay, we know you're going to be the flat defender in a quarter half. Like, you can't do that. You've got to be able to do everything. But those are some things that I think that he could really thrive at situationally to get him on the field a little bit. I do, however, think, especially with Isaiah Rodgers and drafting Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, and you bring Avonte Maddox back, I do think there's going to be limited opportunities for him this year, barring injury, but I do think he figures heavily into the Eagles' future. So anybody else have anything? Oh.
Yeah, I'm glad you showed that play because just it's so funny going back and watching film last year, and there's just night and day difference how much faster he was closing space, especially on like screen plays, on run plays when he had to crack replace and fill downhill. He was much quicker closing space than Bradbury was, and he was much more aggressive and physical. This defense was missing that last year for most of the year. I think he brings that in spades, and it especially helps with how big he is as a player. He's definitely an outlier with his size. It's just he brings something that they didn't have for most of last year. So I'm really excited to see him not only improve in their pass defense, but improve in the screen game and the tackling game and the physical part of playing the position.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonny, did you start to say something? Did you have something else you wanted to throw out about Kelee Ringo before we move on?
No, I was just going to blame your bad hosting skills for just ending a point, and I had no idea whether it was a question or not. That was all. So no, I'm good.
Fair.
I'm good with Ringo. I'm happy to move on when you are.
Okay, Eric, anything else before we move on?
Yeah, last thing I'd mention. In let's call it 3rd and medium to 3rd and 10 situations, a lot of NFL offenses like to run a 3-by-1, but on the backside they'll have a tight end, because often it forces the defense to decide if they want to do a matchup-based coverage or if they're just going to stick their corner out there. And the benefit with Ringo is you can just leave him there no matter what, and you don't tip off your coverage. And so it's nice to have guys with like size, speed, and some physicality. So I could see, in the future, if he develops into a starting corner, you have like a potentially lethal 3rd down defense, because last year that was their bugaboo. I looked it up recently. Their 1st down defense was fairly, I think, middle of the pack. Maybe even a little above that. And then they got to 3rd down. They'd go into these man coverage looks, and like it would be Morrow, the slot corner, or Bradbury, obviously, just getting roasted continually. So just want to add that little nugget.
And that is going to do it for the first part of this interview with Nick and Eric of the Philly Film Room podcast, talking about the Eagles' rookie seasons last year. Be sure you guys are following them on Twitter and YouTube. The content they put out is top notch, and I'm really excited we were able to get them on the show. You guys be sure and tune back in next week for part 2 of this interview, and we're going to talk about Nolan Smith, Sidney Brown, and Moro Ajomo. But until then, we'll catch you guys next week with another episode.